we've got Dan in Brooklyn, New York, and they've got a weird one for you here as far as the description. And you're on with Tracie and Mandisa, and it says here that you have a friend, somebody that you went out with, that thought she should be able to kill babies after they're born. Is that correct?
Yeah, I know. It's so hard to believe. As it was happening, I was like, I really got to find a way to talk to Tracie about
I can
this,
probably guarantee you that I'm going to side with you on this one, but let's, just for grins, let's spend a minute just hearing it.
On that.
Yeah, so I'll just give a very quick background. Basically,
sure.
I had never met this girl in person before. It was through a dating app. And I just, went on a date. And
it was like killmybaby.com? Like,
it was just a normal like Tinder dating app. And so what happened was,
well, now I feel bad because people do kill infants, and so maybe that was flip. And so I felt bad kind of immediately after I just made that joke. So FYI, it's not funny. I mean, people are laughing at it now and I'm apologizing. And it's like, seriously, it's not funny to kill babies. And maybe that was a joke that I should have thought before it came out. So I apologize to people if that was offensive. And Dan, please proceed.
Sure. So we had talked a little bit about philosophy, and it sort of came up out of like, oh, what's some controversial opinion that you have? And I was like, well, we probably are on the same page about a lot of things. I mentioned
I don't like chocolate ice cream. What's yours?
But, yeah. And then she was like, well, here's something that I have. I think that you should be able to, if you determine after a child is born, if they have like a severe problem that, and hers sort of ranged from, some disease that caused you to...
I'm going to say it doesn't matter. I'm going to say that it doesn't matter to me.
So, well, I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm not trying to make her point.
She's basically saying if it's something I really don't want,
then you should be able to get rid of...
So here's what I was trying to figure out, because she was the kind of person who was very open to debate. And I remember listening on the Godless Bitches podcast multiple times, and here on the show, your perspective on abortion, which I think is very, very cogent, but for the life of me, I'm so bad at relating it.
No problem.
Even when I've just talked to my parents about it, it's like, I feel like it's a very complex argument, and I can never wrap my head around explaining it clearly and concisely.
Yeah.
And so I tried doing it and sort of failed. And then also was trying to remember, like, so how did Tracie come to a conclusion about the delineation about when it's acceptable to have an abortion, in the first trimester, or something like that?
Yeah, okay.
Or not. So that's sort of what I'm trying. I would like just a sort of like input from you, I guess, about how you came to that conclusion, and maybe if you can have like a TLDR of your argument, because I feel like I want to share it more often. Yeah,
basically, I mean, there's the law, there's, my dream world, so there's what you want, and then there's what there is, right? And so what there is we have a Roe v. Wade thing, which says that it can seem counterintuitive to some folks, but Roe v. Wade basically says that if you need somebody else's body to survive, you can't have it. If you don't need somebody else's body to survive, you can. It's kind of weird. But I think the point that they're trying to make is they're not saying that you actually have a right to use someone else's body once you are viable. What they're saying is the state now has an interest in the fetus at that point, or the unborn if you prefer. I don't want to use language that people feel is loaded, the unborn, that the state now has an interest in it because it can be autonomous in and of itself, right? So that's the argument the state is making. And with that, they've tried to push back viability, right? So what they're basically saying is that, if like one child in a million can survive at this stage, that means that's when babies are viable, that's when unborns are viable. And I don't buy into that. To me, viable means you're going to be able to survive at least as well, or pretty much as well as a child that's born. If you're going to struggle and I'm not going to say that that's the same as, a child who's born after a full gestation. But so I'm okay, for example, I'm willing to listen to arguments about the concept of abortions with that are just sort of early births or early C-sections, right? So for right now, what we do is we actually have scheduled C-sections or scheduled induced births. I don't know, and that would be cutting off
7-8 months.
Yeah, and that would be, well, I mean, I don't know about 7 months, but I mean, people will schedule it so that it does happen prior to the natural birth, right? So we are aborting the natural process, and we are allowing for an early birth in those cases that is not the natural gestation and birth period, right? We're basically setting up a schedule and saying we're going to do it early, or we're going to do it here if it hasn't happened naturally by then, and that is aborting the process. But we don't consider that abortion because these are women who want their babies, and the babies survive those procedures most of the time. Like that, our goal is that the unborn will survive and be born. But they are still, in my mind, an abortion because you're aborting the process, the natural process, which that's what an abortion is. So when you have this idea that it's viable, if the state wants to be involved and they want to, argue about how this procedure can be done, if somebody doesn't want to carry to term and they want to say, we're going to take that vested interest that Roe v. Wade has given us at 6 months, and you can have the abortion, but we are going to take custody of this unborn once it's born, and it's ours, right? You still have to birth it, and it will be a citizen, but you can end the pregnancy and not basically continue to have your body used without your consent, right? Which is ultimately the reason that we reject things like rape. So in the early stages, what they're basically saying is if you can't survive without another person's body, too bad, so sad is what they're basically describing. And you're the same as somebody who couldn't survive without a kidney donation. They call it personhood. They're calling it personhood. And I shouldn't have said that it's kind of the same as somebody that would donate a kidney or need a kidney, because what they're really saying is that you're not viable and you haven't reached personhood. You have no autonomous existence that can be had at that point, and therefore this is not up to the state. This is not a citizen or could not be a citizen if it were born. It's not viable. I kind of tend to look at it a little bit different when I'm, because I'm coming at this from bodily autonomy, which is not necessarily where Roe v. Wade is going with it. And so I look at it like nobody gets to be forced to have somebody else use their body without their consent for the same reasons we don't allow a rape. And once somebody's born, they're really not your concern anymore as far as you don't get to make decisions to kill them any more than you would be able to make a decision to kill your neighbor, because now this person is a citizen with all the entitlements and protections of the state, right? It's been born, it is a citizen, it's got the Social Security number.
What I'm also trying to understand is that usually, I'm sorry,
No problem.
I remember, with every pregnancy that I carry to term, there are usually, a multitude of tests that are performed, on the mom to determine the health of the baby. Now, I know that in some instances there are some health, concerns or health issues that you cannot determine until once the baby is born. But
or sometimes they're caused by the birth, right? The birth is handled a certain way and the child is somehow damaged and.
Correct.
Yeah.
And but also, and I know there are some instances where you have premature births, but usually, there are some tests done before the child is. I think there is a test done for Down syndrome that can be determined before the child is born. So I think it depends on there is to me, there would be no justification for a mother deciding to kill her child once it's born due to either birth defect or something, because in some instances or many instances, you can find out about certain medical issues before the child is born.
Right.
You can't just change your mind and decide that, I don't want to have this child anymore, therefore I'm going to end its life once the child is born.
Now, there are also questions about, for example, we have an opt-out parenting system, right?
Yeah.
So you're basically, the child is born, and if you can prove genetic relation like paternity or maternity to the child, then our state says you can claim you've got paternal rights. The kid is born, you both have the paternal rights and obligations. And then you have to look at whether or not you want to step out. And we have kind of a messed up situation where if one person wants to withdraw, so like if she as the mother says, hey, I don't want anything to do with this, and the father steps up and says, wait, I want to take custody. Or if anybody steps up that wants to take custody, they can sue for custody if she doesn't want custody. But if it's the father in particular, she would then be potentially responsible for helping to support the child.
Right.
And so if one of the parents wants the kid, the other one becomes kind of, legally obligated to it, and whether or not people like the system, that's how it works. And so when I'm looking at this, though, what I'm seeing the law saying is sort of like, once you're born, you're a state concern. Our laws that protect human beings protect you as a person when you're born as a person in our society. Before you're viable, you need somebody else's body to survive, and they don't want to lend you their body for your survival. They don't have to. And then there's this in-between period where you have this arguable situation where somebody is potentially autonomous, but they are just sort of in someone else. And the question of how do you handle that legally is where I think people get, the most confused about it. I have no objection to people talking about the concept of separating mother and child and still going forward like that's a birth. I would be open to that. I'm not saying that, for me, it's more a question of the process that people have a problem with at that point, right? Because the abortions at that point still result in a child that would be dead, or with an unborn that comes out and they're dead. And that's what freaks people out. And I'm not necessarily going to sit here and hammer the table and say, yes, this must result in a dead, in a dead human being at the end of this. I'm not that devoted to that, to that process. And so that's kind of where I would deviate.
So I feel like I might be missing the last point that you made there. I apologize for that. So when you're saying that in-between period, like everything you said before, you said, like, you definitely have an objection after they're born, which I totally understand.
Oh, yeah, because then the state the state has to protect you.
Right, exactly. So that's like, exactly. So, but I'm more asking, I guess, about, like, if you found out a month before pregnancy that your child is going to be born with some really debilitating disease that would basically cause them to lead a really painful life for the first, maybe even a few months, and then they just would end up probably dying. At the 8-month period, would that be an acceptable sort of point to have an abortion?
So what I'm basically saying is that I would never force somebody to gestate a child when they don't want to. Never. And when it comes to a situation like what you just described, I think that what Roe v. Wade is saying is the state has an interest in that, right? And so the state needs to look at that. And what I'm saying is that I'm saying I would not, the 8-month period, I would not necessarily, I would do everything I could to not force somebody to carry to term. And if the process or the procedure at that point results in the person being, the human being that is in there, the unborn that's in there being dead at the end of the procedure, that's a problem with the procedure that society has to argue about, right, and decide on. But that's not about, to me, her right to not gestate when she doesn't want to, when she's not consenting, is the part that I'm saying I support all the time. Now, what you do, how you do the procedure, and whether it results in something alive or not alive at the end of it, that's a medical sort of question that has to be addressed. And if society wants to argue about how you do it, that's fine. And if somebody objects to the fact that it always results in a death, then they can object to that, and we can look at that process and see if there's humane ways to do it in a way that doesn't result in a death. That's kind of up to the medical community and to the society, according to where we stand on Roe v. Wade, which says that we can make an interest in that because this is something that could be autonomous. And so if this could be an autonomous person, shouldn't they, shouldn't we at least be able to consider them in the equation? And I'm like, I have no objection to that. But I'm not going to consider them to the point that I then force somebody to have their body violated in a way that they don't agree to and they don't consent to. So
that position of not wanting to force someone to maintain that.
Right.
Sort of goes up to literally like the day of natural birth for you. Just so I'm trying to fully understand your point.
I'm not going to, I mean, to me, I view that as being the equivalent of a rape. I'm not going to let somebody violate your body. When you decide, it's like if me and you are having sex and 20 minutes in, I say, hey, I'm not down with this and I'm withdrawing my consent. We need to stop this. In my mind, the person needs to stop. There's no question about it. I get to say when somebody uses my body and doesn't use my body, the end. And unless I've broken laws, right? I mean, legally, we can violate people's bodies in certain ways when they break laws and they become incarcerated. They can be searched or they can, there's things we can do that. So, for example, some states have the death penalty, right? Which is pretty much the ultimate violation of someone's body. And so we can do that if somebody breaks a law, because we reserve as a state the right to restrict your freedoms, restrict your rights, we can put restrictions on a person, not undue ones. We can't torture people or things like that, but we can take steps to ensure social safety, which is, the theory anyway, and we can deal with that. But I don't have a problem, considering somebody that could be surviving autonomously, but I'm not going to violate someone's most basic rights as a human being, if they haven't done anything wrong, they haven't committed a crime.
Yeah. Okay, I think I understand a lot more fully now, and I think it might stem from the fact that your point is that it all comes down to bodily autonomy, and for her, it seems like that wasn't even part of it. It was a whole other I should have the right to decide what happens to my child.
She's operating from a different perspective, and I think she might have a different view of what I would consider parental rights. Right? Some people have I
think that's what it exactly. Yeah. I think that's what it came down to.
She's got some strong views. That's her kid in her head, right? And not it doesn't matter if somebody kills it.
Right. No. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Anyway, I don't want to take up more of your time. I know this is such a weird topic.
It is weird, but okay.